Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the June Survivorship Lecture Series. We are having with us again this morning Dr. Susan Magasi. I hope I'm saying that right, Susan. She is a professor and head of occupational therapy at UIC with a joint appointment in disability studies. She's passionate about issues of health and participation equity for people with disabilities. She works closely with the disability community using an equity-focused, community-based participatory approach to help understand and break down barriers to healthcare, and social participation for people with disabilities, including those who acquire it through their cancer experiences. So today she'll be talking about work that she's been doing at the intersection of cancer and disability over the past 13 years. So excited to hear your talk. Go ahead, Susan.
Hi, it's nice to see lots of familiar faces. And again, related to my lack of tech savviness, I have sometimes trouble seeing the Zoom gallery along with my slides. So I can't see you all right now, but I know many of you here. Um, so if you have a comment or feedback, please just sort of jump in and interrupt me. I would love for this to be a conversation. Some of you who have heard me speak before about this topic, some of it will be familiar. Um, and so I hope that that's okay if there's a little bit of a repeat of some of the content, but I also want to spend some time showing you the app that we've created. I've talked about it with you in the past, and now it's out there in a feasibility trial, and I would love to sort of just show you some of the content and how it's evolved over time. Um, Hopefully, we're currently recruiting for that feasibility trial. We're a little behind, but we would love your support too in helping us get it in the hands of people who might benefit from it. So I just wanted to start actually by thinking a little bit about the concept of disability. Um, and would love to either hear from you out loud or in the chat. When you think about disability, what images, impressions come to mind?
I'll get the ball rolling for you, Susan.
Thank you.
It's, I mean, the obvious disabilities, like in your picture here, the folks who are in wheelchairs, folks who are using assistive devices or bedridden, maybe, but also just people with chronic illnesses or cancer. I have a genetic condition that causes me to be disabled, and it's hard to see,
Mhm.
and you don't always know there's a disability when one exists.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, you've covered like a broad range of topics there, Debbie, and I appreciate that. What are some other things that come to mind when people think about disability? It's a loaded term for a lot of people. So I just love some thoughts, some reactions.
I think there's a lot of stigma that is attached to disability, at least, especially when I think about cancer.
Mhm.
Say a little bit more about that tomorrow.
Um, I guess I think that cancer survivors are hesitant to see themselves as having a disability, and I think that partly because it's not visible, and because it's not all of many of the things that Dr. Mance just described. So people feel like it's them and it's not the rest of the world. It's not that they're disabled in a world that is able or able. And I think that even in medicine, there's just a lot of hesitancy to talk about it and to share to recognize it, I guess, and to give people resources to deal with it. I think that people are just sort of left to figure it out. You know, oh, you have this chronic fatigue. Oh, you have this brain fog. Oh, you have, you know, chronic pain related to your cancer treatment. You know, that's just really hard. You know, there's no recognition of the fact that it's a disability and that there are resources to deal with it. I don't know if that is, I mean, that's sort of what I find in my work and my personal experience.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you both of you for sharing those responses and also, being self-disclosing, right, about disability because you're right, there is a lot of stigma around disability. And, people who acquire disabilities over the course of their lives or their cancer experiences have internalized a lot of these beliefs, attitudes, biases, um, around what disability is and who people with disabilities are. Um, some of it, not always positive, right? It's like you hear people say, "Oh gosh, if that was me, dot, 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 I couldn't live with that, or I wouldn't want to live that way." So there's some of those ideas about, value and quality of life that people
Oh,
with
except
disabilities have. Mhm.
no, I don't know.
So we call some of that internalized ableism, or self-stigma that, we all have different beliefs about disability. And then we bring those accumulated life experiences with us. And as, our functional abilities change, our disability status changes, we have to sort of reorganize and make sense of what that means and how to live as a person, with disabilities, functional impairments, whatever you want to call them, in a world that is not well adapted or well set up to accommodate or address those needs. And some of that internalized ableism can make it challenging for people, one, to recognize what they're experiencing as a disability. And as a result, it can make it challenging for people to communicate what their needs are. Sometimes it can, both with people in, their personal, informal social networks, friends, families, but also with healthcare providers. And then if we're thinking about other aspects of life, it's hard to ask or know that you're entitled to accommodations, say in the workplace, that would, enable you to continue to do those things that you want or need to do, with accommodations. You might be doing them differently. And as Tamara mentioned, that leads a lot of people to have to figure it out on their own, figure it out through processes of trial and error. It means that people are running into the same set of obstacles and the same barriers sort of constantly, where, you know, potentially those don't need to happen.
Susan.
Society is also, oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's Dr. Mance. I just want to highlight something like that you're talking about, giving a kind of real example. Um,
Mhm.
I was in my fellowship, my director said, "Oh, we need to get you a handicap placard so you can park closer to the building because of my ataxia and my walking. It's impaired." And that's a lot to deal with too, to come to terms with your own disability. And like you say, it's you don't even know you should ask for these things, but it's also just losing your sense of independence comes with it as well. And another
Hmm.
thing I want to say is sometimes you it's that you don't know when to ask for help, and sometimes you're hesitant to take it again because of that, wanting to hold on to being able to do things yourself.
Yeah, it's complicated, right? Like
It's
there is that wanting to maintain that sense of autonomy, um, doing it all on my own, doing it the way other people are doing it. People sometimes also are concerned that if they request accommodations or receive accommodations, that people will, make assumptions about their capacity, they're getting a free ride, they're taking advantage of the system in some sort of way. And it's not uncommon. We've all heard stories, right, about people policing the use of the accessible parking spots, right? Especially with people with hidden or invisible disabilities. So I think there is that piece about how it impacts your self-identity. And then there's also these concerns that people have about if I do get accommodations or if I do acknowledge disability as part of my total experience, not my whole experience. Disability can be a part of who you are without it invalidating other strengths, um, your expertise, your knowledge. But it shifts. And people are also concerned about losing that self-image, but also the image of that other people have of them. It's also really challenging when people request accommodations and those accommodations are questioned or denied. It takes a lot of persistence um, to self-advocate in an ableist society. Um, the our social structures, healthcare, work environments, school, all the environments that we function in are not designed for people with disabilities, for people with bodies and minds that function outside of some normative standards. I have a good friend who's a wheelchair user due to osteogenesis imperfecta, and she has a blog and a strong social media presence about the ADA nerd. So she'll often post kind of pictures of places that she's encountered that are inaccessible in a variety of ways. And she works as a fieldwork coordinator in North Carolina for occupational therapy students. So she's currently doing all of these site visits to different healthcare facilities. And she posted a picture of a bathroom at a major medical center and just the inaccessibility in the bathroom of, what is a healthcare setting where you would anticipate there are a lot of people with a variety of functional abilities. And even, 30 plus years after the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, we continue to see sort of public spaces and pervasive attitudes around disability that are, denying people their fundamental civil rights for access to spaces and places. And, that's the concrete stuff like that we can see, right? And then there's the whole attitudinal piece that's sometimes even harder to tackle. So thank you for sharing all that. And I realize we're 17 minutes in and I haven't started the slides. So, but I think it's an important discussion for laying a foundation about, what disability is, what we're talking about when we think about disability. And it can look and Debbie, you did a great job in your initial response that, like we initially think about, maybe the stereotypical wheelchair user or somebody who, has to stay in bed because of lack of of mobility using these assistive devices. But then, both of you provided really great examples about other hidden or invisible disabilities, the mental fog, the impact of chronic illness, the fatigue, the pain, all of those things contribute to the disability experience when they get in the way of people doing the things that they want or need to do. And as an occupational therapist, with this grounding in disability studies, you know, my work really tends to focus not on cure, but on helping people sort of learn to live and do those occupations or those things that give their lives sort of meaning and purpose. Um, and there are lots of ways that we can continue to do that even when living with the effects of disability. So let's just get a little bit of background statistics here as well. So, people with disabilities have been called the largest minority group in the country. Um, the statistics vary greatly depending on the type of disability or the definition of disability, and there are multiple definitions out there. But approximately 61 million Americans live with some form of disability. Um, So again, largest disability group in the country, about 1 in 5 people have some sort of functional impairment. Could be physical, cognitive, sensory, emotional, learning related. Unfortunately, people with disabilities remain an unrecognized health disparities population. Um, the NIH did finally adapt their definition to include people with disabilities as a health disparities population. But you know, the ADA is under threat currently. The Americans with Disabilities Act, so people are feeling particularly vulnerable across a variety of spaces. But as we've discussed, people with disabilities are also largely absent from the cancer disparities agenda. Um, Although there are some statistics about how many people um, continue to experience long-term and late effects of cancer well into survivorship. Um, People from underserved communities, minoritized communities, are also disproportionately impacted by cancer, not by cancer, sorry, by disability. I don't think that'll be surprising to everybody. And there is evidence that providers are biased against people with disabilities in healthcare settings and that they lack skills and confidence to serve that population. Um, Most recently, um, a study by Izoni and colleagues that came out in 2021 um, was a survey of over 700 practicing physicians, and it was published in Health Affairs. And it found that 82% of physicians reported that they believe that people with disabilities have a worse quality of life than their non-disabled peers. Only 40% of these physicians reported that they felt confident in their abilities to provide quality care to people with disabilities. About half agreed that they welcome people with disabilities into their practice, which means about half don't. And 18% strongly agreed that the system treats people with disabilities unfairly. Um, we also know that there are a lot of persistent stigma around disability. This leads to people's reluctance to claim disability. There is also a lack of routine collection about disability identifiers in clinical and epidemiological studies, which makes it, challenging to document the impact of people with disabilities and various outcomes. Although 61 million people in the United States identify as having a disability, there's tremendous diversity in that population, and that makes it really challenging to develop evidence-based practice treatment guidelines, precision medicine approaches, just because of that diversity. People with disabilities have also historically been excluded from clinical trials research. Um, you've all read the research, you've designed the research, and you know that often those disabling conditions are listed in the exclusion criteria because it creates sort of diagnostic messiness and uncertainty in treatment. So this has important implications as we are translating research from clinical trials to clinical practice. There's also a lot of, sorry, not a lot, a lack of input from the disability community itself about the research agenda and what research priorities ought to be. And very few um, people with disabilities are able to persist through the leaky pipeline of of research education and clinical education to become those research and clinical leaders. So it's wonderful to see some exceptions to that here in the room. So some specifics around cancer. We know that people with disabilities already live with a thinner margin of health. So as a result of some disability challenges, chronic illness, chronic conditions, progressive illnesses, we know that people with disabilities already live with a thinner margin of health. So often, if one thing goes wrong, sort of medically, or also within the broader sort of context of social determinants of health, it can more easily throw other things out of whack and often leads to a cascade of health consequences, but then also consequences in social participation, health management, which can impact employment, housing stability, ability to do your self-care roles, your caregiving roles, and other aspects of life. Um, People with disabilities are less likely to receive mammograms than their non-disabled peers and other cancer screenings. Mammograms have been most extensively studied within the population. People tend to be diagnosed later in the process, and there's differences in how they are treated and the treatment ranges that are offered. Um, People have also called cancer a double whammy for people with pre-existing disabilities. It can exacerbate other conditions like fatigue, restrict ADLs, and functional independence. Um, Also, if you think of a person, say, with a mobility impairment who's going through cancer treatment, um, it can make it more challenging to manage some of those side effects of cancer, like nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, if it makes it difficult for you to, um, do some of that bowel bladder kind of manage, need to transfer, you know, to the commode or other things. So it's important to think about some of those consequences and impacts. I have a friend and colleague who's a woman with a spinal cord injury who was undergoing breast cancer treatment and post-treatment she was given the advice to not lift anything over 15 pounds. And she's like, and I'm a person with a spinal cord injury. I transfer by, lifting myself up with my arms. How am I supposed to do these transfers and these life skills that are essential for me? Am I supposed to float? But there was no recognition of sort of the different ways that she was going to have to manage as a wheelchair user and a woman who lived alone these consequences of cancer. I'm going to skip a couple of slides. This is a study that we did a number of years ago related to breast cancer screening, but I want to jump ahead, so I apologize for jumping. But I want to shift us over, since it's a survivorship meeting, shift us over to the survivorship and some of the work that we've been doing in this space to develop some tools to support cancer survivors who acquire disabilities as a result of their cancer experience. So these are statistics that I'm sure that you're well acquainted with, and there are approximately 17 million cancer survivors in the United States right now, which is fantastic. The result of a lot of investment in improving treatment and treatment outcomes for cancer. What's not talked about as often, and Tamara mentioned this already, is that there's less conversation about the long-term and late effects on people. But we know from data that about 40% of cancer survivors experience long-term physical, cognitive, and psychosocial consequences of cancer and its treatment. And I should probably update that to add sensory into that list, just to make it explicit that there are some of those other impacts. This leads to activity limitations and participation restrictions in major areas of life. And by most contemporary definitions of disability, including those offered by the World Health Organization, the Americans with Disabilities Act, this meets the definition of disability, even if people do not self-identify as a person with a disability. We hear from cancer survivors that these long-term and late disabling effects are not adequately addressed across the cancer continuum. And as Tamara mentioned, again, this leaves people feeling both surprised that they're dealing with these long-term effects. It leads people to have to figure things out on their own. And sometimes we've heard from people as well that it leaves people feeling emotionally as if they're doing something wrong, or that they have somehow not moved past the cancer in the ways that is expected and that they're supposed to. And people then further internalize that sense of disappointment, or I hate a failure for not meeting the expectation. Media representations also play into this, how we talk about survivorship, how we see survivorship celebrated. And that's an important component as well. This next slide, I know it has a lot going on, but this is from a small study that we did with largely qualitative with 30 cancer survivors, breast cancer, head and neck cancer, and sarcoma, talking about their long-term experiences of cancer. And we used an occupational therapy measure called the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure that looks at areas of function in terms of self-care, productivity, and leisure, and just gives a sense of the functional areas that people identified as having performance deficits. So they were not able to do the things that they identified as important at the level that they wanted to. So sort of this mismatch between what I want to do and where I'm doing it. So you can see people's functional mobility were impacted, things like personal hygiene, some of those basic ADLs, um, as well as productivity. Our sample skewed a little bit older, so many of them had retired, but people were impacted in their work performance, in their household chores. Driving was significantly impacted amongst people. And if you think of like how central sort of driving is to sort of US society, and as a gateway to participation in other key important areas. Um, that forced people to restrict social activities. It also forced some of our participants to retire because they were no longer, able to get to work or do work in the way that they wanted to. And then it also had a big impact on um, leisure. And so again, exercise sort of straddles leisure and self-care. People see it as both a kind of a means and an end. Um, and there are just some qualitative quotes there that reinforce people's experiences. This is just a set of quotes from the survivors themselves, again, re-emphasizing the ways that they felt unprepared for dealing with the long-term effects of cancer, the profound impact that cancer was having on their daily lives and participation, um, ambivalence about adopting that term. So I just want to read a couple of these because we picked these ones because we felt that they were particularly powerful. So starting in the left-hand corner, we had people talking about how they felt like a slacker for not being able to move on. So again, this idea of they're internalizing this piece. Um, Even when I finally applied for disability plates, I thought, well, I'm not really disabled. I could just park down there and just take my time and walk. So again, we're seeing some of that ambivalence that Deborah mentioned at the beginning of like, oh, what does it mean to access these services? And how do I negotiate that activity? We also heard from people that sometimes while they respected people with disabilities, they were still othering them. And it's like, okay, I'm having these challenges, but I'm not really disabled because I'm not that stereotypical wheelchair user, or, I'm still active in some ways. So again, there was this sense of, okay, disability, it's a thing, it's valid, but I don't quite reach that threshold. So I'm not really entitled to these supports or benefits. Um, then they like this. Well, I didn't like it, but the only thing worse than going through cancer treatment is after cancer treatment. So acknowledging again that as hard as cancer treatment was, these after effects are are pervasive and important. And then we had a few people who were able to adopt a more positive disability identity, this idea that I'm still me, but I'm different. So they were starting to integrate their functional changes, their disability as sort of a global understanding of who I am, still me at my core, but now I have this new aspect of people. We had a small group of participants and mostly people who had pre-existing exposure to disability community or supports and services in some kind of way. But they said they started to see my condition as a disability and and in the larger context as something that doesn't have to be fixed. So that person was able to start sort of acknowledging and affirming their disability status, recognizing some of that structural ableism that was potentially getting in the way of doing the things that they wanted and needed to do. So we took all of these ideas that we were hearing from our cancer survivors and recognized that there was a, oops, sorry, there was a gap there and an opportunity to provide some supports for people who are experiencing these long-term and late effects. Um, this could be done in person, through clinics, through rehab services, through that ongoing and extended care. A lot of community-based organizations are also picking up the slack in these areas, for things that the healthcare system, as currently designed, does not have the opportunity to get to. Um, but we know that less than 10% of people who need cancer rehab services are currently receiving it. There's a variety of sort of structural bandwidth, organizational issues that are leading to that. Through our involvement in Chicago Check, we had the opportunity to develop some interventions using in collaboration with an interdisciplinary team and a group of cancer survivors with disabilities who we called our survivor scientists. We developed a self-management intervention that maps to these challenges that we were hearing from our cancer survivors. It is organized into four broad manual modules. We Can Relate aims to create a normalization and validation of people's experiences of long-term after effects slash disability amongst cancer survivors. The sense that what you're not alone. These long-term effects are common and they do have an impact. Sort of trying to break down some of those taboos. Our largest module is focused on self-management principles. We call it We Can Adapt. So we introduce the concept of self-management. We teach concrete skills like goal setting, task analysis, action planning. We adapted energy conservation principles for cancer survivors and applied them more broadly. So those are sort of those 5 Ps. And then we also did some environmental adaptation. How can you adapt the environment task demands to help you do the things that you want and need to do? One of our collaborators is a psychologist who's an expert in mindfulness-based interventions. So we can be focuses on an introduction to mindfulness and mindfulness-based practices. That is another form of self-management to help people cope with the long-term effects. Our last module is more informed by our disability studies and disability rights perspective. It's focused more on self-advocacy, communicating your needs, knowing your rights, asserting your rights, introduction to the Americans with Disabilities and reasonable accommodations in the workplace and how to ask for those. We got a lot of feedback throughout the process about this ambivalence that people have around disability. So we tried to ease people into the concept of disability and hit it a little bit harder towards the end of the intervention at a time where we've hopefully built up a little trust amongst the participants or the users of the app. And hopefully by the time they've persisted through sort of the 4 weeks of intervention that they're willing to go there with us. And so far people have been. This is just some screenshots, but I'm going to move on to close out of this. And I'd like to actually show you a little bit of the app. So let's see, stop screen sharing. So I'm changing between systems, so hopefully I don't X out of everything in the process. Going over there. Okay, can you see that?
Yeah, I can. I believe we can.
Okay. I was hoping when I got that back that I would be able to see you again, but okay. So this is the landing page of the app. Okay. Oh, I was all logged in before. Just give me a second. So this is our little catchphrase, and we actually got this from one of our cancer.
Oops, I'm
That
sorry.
you can.
Oops,
Uh-huh.
Susan, we lost you for a second. I just wanted to
Oh,
if you said anything, it might just be me.
okay. I don't think I said anything important. Um, just the emphasis of the course is helping people take back control of what you can. And it was we got that language from one of our survivor scientists who is both living with the long-term effects of cancer and was herself a physiatrist working in the cancer care space. Um, so this is it's a web-based app, so you can either access it on a mobile device like a smartphone or through a computer browser like this. It optimizes better on the smartphone, but we'll explore it this way. Um, so we, saw subtle visual representation of cancer amongst our survivors, and it takes you into the course itself. So let me see if I can move these screen controls because I think they're getting in the way. Yeah. Okay. Put that over there. So we have our navigation bars down here at the bottom that explore different features of the app. There's the course itself. So this is the main portion of the intervention. You can connect to peers through the app and communicate with other users. So it also offers these multiple sort of circles of support, one-on-one connection. There are community forums that you can sort of discuss and crowdsource information. And then there's a virtual library that has fact sheets and resources on a variety of cancer related topics, some of which our team created and some of which we reached out to other cancer support organizations. There's a bunch of really nice resources in there from Triage Cancer around cancer advocacy and rights and financial planning and some of those other things. Forms and templates are just resources that support doing of the course. So this course is designed, or the intervention is designed sort of using the principles of mobile micro learning modules. So the goal is not that people are going to have to spend a ton of time in the app because we know people have busy lives. We also know that people want the flexibility to get back in their life. And since a lot of what we're saying in these intervention is about, putting cancer in its place while building in these strategies. So the goal is that people will engage with the tool for about 5 to 10 minutes a day, get little bite-sized pieces of information that then they can hopefully take back and use and apply in their daily lives. So here the modules are in different colors and you can see the topics that we cover throughout. I wanted to show you a couple of these. So it's really aimed to be, sort of very simple in terms of content that they have to click through individual slides. And here we're shifting to that focus on social participation or what we're calling impact on doing. So, the final session of Me Can Relate will focus on the way that symptoms can impact the things that you do and why this matters to your quality of life. And by this point, we've talked about symptoms and about the long-term effects. We try to embed the course content using sort of words and real-world experiences from our survivors to the extent possible, while also linking it to relevant research. So, in the words of one of our wise survivors, I am more than a collection of body parts. And we try to make it conversational. You are indeed. It is the things that you do and the activities that you engage in that make you who you are and give meaning to your life. The World Health Organization calls this engagement in life activities participation. And then participation covers a gamut of life activities from making your bed to shopping to working to attending cultural events and social gathering. Research suggests that participation in meaningful activities has a positive impact on physical health, mental health, and quality of life. So, really trying to situate why this emphasis on participation is important and matters. And then we ground that back to how that affects, cancer, the long-term effects of cancer that affect your body, mind, thoughts, and feelings can make it harder to do those things that you want to need to do, which can affect your physical health, mental, and well-being. And then we try to, again, pull in real world examples that we heard from our survivor scientists and from the research. This is what happened to Alex. After his head and neck cancer, he had trouble swallowing and would sometimes choke and cough while eating. This made him feel self-conscious about eating around others. So rather than having lunch in the staff room, he would eat at his desk. He missed joking around with his coworkers, but cut out the activity for fear of making them uncomfortable. So it shows that linkage between the symptoms to the activity restrictions to the impact on sort of quality of life and experiences. And then here we're sort of starting to preview the sort of self-management process and principles that we're going to introduce later on. He reflected on what was giving meaning to his day. He realized that it was the connection and that it was connection and camaraderie. He used strategies for me we can manage. He set a goal to join the group for lunch for 2 days a week. He developed a plan in order to enable him to do this. And then we delineated out a couple of sort of action items or steps that he could do that integrate in some of the principles that we have sort of taught and that we're going to continue to teach throughout. That's not a very good graphic, but it's this process of setting goals and making plans that lies at the heart of we can manage. So all along the way, you're going to be introduced to a variety of tools that you can pick and choose to help you achieve your goals. When you achieve your goals, even small ones, you're creating a repertoire of success that you can use and apply to different situations. And this is what scientists call self-efficacy. So without quoting specific research studies, we try to link it back throughout to evidence-based practices and principles and make those transparent to people because a lot of self-management principles and practices seem like common sense to people. But it's the doing and integrating into your life and practice where sort of the rubber hits the road. And we also make that explicit for people. Um, we always like to end each session with what did you learn and where is this going next? Um, we built in different forms of engagement activities into each module. Often it will be some sort of reflection post that they can reflect on what they learned, apply it to their own life, because, we've all done trainings where you click through the buttons and then you go on to the next thing without fully integrating them. Or, maybe I'm just over disclosing what I do. Um, but we really want people to, to pause and think, okay, how does this apply to me? What can I take away from this particular session that applies to my life? And they can enter their response here. And then they have that opportunity to either post it to the community forum or not. They can always choose to keep something private if that's their preference. They can type in their response and then move forward. So at the end, we like to cheer them on, um, and send them different places where they can go then to the community forum and see like the way other people are using the content and finding meaning, because we think there's value in that social learning component as well, hearing from others, developing a community of support, in these ways. They do have the opportunity to comment on one another's talks. It doesn't seem like they've done that much, but that's okay. The other way, we've also built in, let me just I want to show you one other module, where we built in some videos as well, small animations that, sort of, again, case studies to reinforce the learning content. So this is at the end of the We Can Adapt. So this is after they've learned all of these processes of self-management, both the science behind it, as well as some of the tools, how to write SMART goals, how to develop an action plan, energy conservation principles like planning, prioritizing, giving yourself permission to do things differently, which is sounds small, but it's kind of huge. Um, Body positioning as well. So then we tried to build in case studies along the way. So this is a review. Here's everything that we've covered in the module. And then here is a video, and let me know if the video works, that aims to pull it all together. Can you hear that?
My faith
Yes.
is everything to me. It connects me to my culture, my community, and my spiritual core. And it really helped me get through all of that surgery, chemo, and radiation. When I finished treatment, I was so excited to get back to my weekly services and running the children's program. But it was overwhelming. I never realized how physically, mentally, and emotionally demanding it was to juggle all the different pieces of my spiritual life. Right now, I find myself being more depleted than restored. Some days, even quiet reading of my prayer book is too much for me. I reviewed my values checklist and knew this was an important part of who I am, but I just didn't know how to start reconnecting. After some deep breathing and soul searching, I thought about all the strategies that I've been learning and applying to individual activities and thought about how they relate to this important part of my life. I set myself a reasonable SMART goal and created an action plan based on the 5 Ps. First, I prioritized activities that strengthened my connection with my God and my community. I built a weekly schedule to make sure that I have enough rest so that I show up for services with my batteries charged. I talked to my faith leader, who helped me arrange a carpool so I don't have to walk as much. We also totally reorganized the space for the children's program so that I can sit comfortably and not have to be getting up and down off the floor all the time. The kids love getting my chair and other supplies and are learning about service and being in community in the process. I'm even mentoring a youth leader to help me out. It was hard to let her take on some of my responsibilities, but I'm working at being gracious and giving us all permission to do things differently. It's really letting me focus on what's most important to me.
So that's what we're aiming to do within the case studies and throughout the content is trying to, bring it to life and then asking them to continue to do that in their own life and apply it to themselves. So that's just a small snapshot of some of the we can manage content and how we are trying to be responsive to the concerns that we heard from cancer survivors and giving them, some tools and some resources to supplement um, other supports and services and medical care that they're getting.
Thank you, Susan, so much. This is a great resource for survivors. I so many times through your talk, I'm like, I feel seen. I'm sure the survivors all feel too, having that. And I mean, I have long COVID, I'll disclose, and the cognitive effects are equated to survivorship brain fog of
Hmm.
chemo. So I can understand how useful a resource like this is for survivors going through a similar thing or other symptoms that just, weren't expected or are harder to manage than they thought. Does anyone else have any other comments? This was a wonderful talk. I would like to start a discussion for the last minute we have. Such great content, Susan.
I really appreciated this. This was so helpful. And thinking of it in the context of psychiatric survivorship, neuropsychiatric survivorship, which is my
Mm.
field too, I think the sort of taking things step by step, having images associated with those steps, having that compassion built in throughout it, and sort of teaching self-compassion, a little bit on the fly, sort of not really calling it that because I think sometimes um, people have a desire to sort of stay strong and fight, and the association of the word fight with the cancer survivorship has been really problematic for me because I think it sort of sets people up to feel like there's an effort they need to be putting into things,
Hmm.
and if they're not doing enough then they haven't fought well enough or something, and that's a really problematic one for me personally. But this was really great and inspiring. Thank you. I think there's also a note at one point we were talking about the bias from healthcare providers, and I'm in the lifespan disability clinic now with UI
Oh,
Health,
okay.
and and we just see so often that in a hospital stay, if people recognize that there was some premorbid, pre-acute disability, that they will not put effort in towards rehab, and they
Hmm.
won't even really investigate what the premorbid range of capacities was to help people return to that. They'll just say, like, oh, this person was disabled already and discharge to
Hmm.
home.
Yeah.
And super problematic. So yeah, we're on a mission together to try to change this from the
Yeah, I have
education
a,
component too.
no, that's really interesting. And yeah, I had a colleague who was also a participant in one of our studies, and he was born with spina bifida, um, and then got cancer. And he said he was really concerned about what the treatment recommendations were and, how they were going to sort of triage his care. And, he ended up saying, I was really glad that they gave me the able-bodied version of cancer care and support. And we've done some work with people with long-term disabilities talking about their cancer care experiences, and people will often draw like contrasts between the where they go for their usual care in like the basement of the health center, and then they went to like the cancer care clinic, and there's like they have cookies and people are treating you nice and there's flowers in the lobby. So for some of these people who had been living with disabilities long term, they get in the cancer care system and they were like, wow. Um, because the cancer care system does a really great job at treating cancer. Doesn't always do a great job about thinking about the how it intersects with disability or the long-term disability components. But that's why we're having these conversations, right? And then hopefully, like little by little, um, shifting the conversation and the work that y'all are all doing is contributing, I think, to that and helping to, you know,
Yeah.
change attitudes. Hmm.
It's important to call it out more, right?
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
anything that's come up that we've kind of crossed that barrier for, like, you know, menstruation or menopause now is getting its time in the limelight. So
Hmm.
we need to make a disability time. Kim in chat is wondering how patients can get access to this program.
Well, we are currently in a feasibility trial, and I had right before the call shared, and you probably didn't even get a chance to see them. Um, Shared our recruitment flyers for the study. There are two versions of it. One where individuals can self-refer. If they scan that QR code, it'll take them to RedCap and they can survey in. Or if it's through a sort of a clinical pattern, you can also refer people. And I would be delighted to have conversations with you about how to do that. People have been pretty receptive to it.
I
I've
bet.
just put my email in the chat, so feel free to reach out to me. But we would love it, obviously, to get it in the hands of more cancer survivors, um, just to get more data and see what people think. But
Yeah, we just need to talk about it more too. I feel like I should bring you back every year to talk, Susan. So,
I'll have different stories to tell over time.
exactly. Claire says there's a fabulous new facility in Med Ed who will help with this for the new med students. Well, so yeah, that's really, where we got to get
Right.
it is
Hmm.
create a rotation for residents, create curriculum for medical students, so this would be a bigger thing. So Kim said that would be great. I'm in Endeavor Health Northwest Community Hospital, and she provided her contact. Do you see
I am
that?
furiously writing it down.
Great.
Tamara's also, Hamlish, who's on this call, is also just doing some really great work in this space.
Yeah.
Um, we both had the opportunity to mentor um, Amy MacArthur, who just finished her PhD, who's also doing really good work at the intersection of disability and cancer and sort of exploring disability identity.
And Dr. Sue is wondering about neurocognitive assessment to measure the impairment. How does that fit in?
It is not a component of the work that we're doing currently, um, but it would be valuable to layer in and to support people. We worked hard to integrate in some accessibility features to make the app accessible to people with a variety of different neurocognitive impacts.
Mhm.
I'm sure there's more work that needs to be done in that space, though.
It's
But
a hard Yeah, it's a hard one to, put your thumb on. And,
Mhm.
it can be helpful, from my own experience, and maybe I should look into neurocognitive testing to be able to get something like that to diagnose it, to really say, yes, you have this,
Mhm.
patients feel these things all the time, but, if you have a neurocognitive test saying, yes, you have decreased attention and problem solving and whatever, it's helpful because then you have something to like tackle as opposed to
Yeah.
just something nebulous, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Dr. Sue said neurocog testing they found is valuable in pediatric patients for school, but can't get Medicaid to pay for it.
Mhm.
So it's a struggle. It is, Dr. Sue, but there are barriers to that as well. Um, so
I, I, I I just want to jump in and say that I think that one of the challenges for cancer survivors is that a lot of the tools are not good at um, uh, identifying a deficit or a disability. So especially like with brain fog um, and fatigue, like some of the measures, and then it adds to the patient's distress
Hmm.
over not having like a bona fide diagnosis. I mean, I hear this from breast cancer survivors all the time that like there isn't any clinical test that will confirm chemobrain or brain fog or cognitive, even though everyone knows that it happens, everyone recognizes it as sort of maybe as a sympathy thing, I don't know. But I think that really um, a lot of the hesitation on the part of patients, because I think patients report symptoms to their providers and providers kind of go, yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that getting that recognition of the disability piece of this among providers is really important because they're the ones who can say, yes, this is a thing. It's not in your
Hmm.
head. It's not something that you have to figure out on your own. There are resources for this. And I think that's the piece that's kind of missing because I think that patients experience it and then they think nobody else, I mean, until they get with a group of other survivors and they're like, and that's why the community piece of this, I think, is really wonderful. I mean, all of it is good, but the community piece is really because that's that community support or that peer support is a really
Yeah.
important piece for
Yeah.
patients that they're being seen and recognized.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. There's been some interesting work in occupational therapy amongst stroke survivors. It hasn't been applied as much in cancer yet around issues related to functional cognition. Um, so really seeing how some of those executive function issues, the sort of higher order ones play out in doing complex tasks. And it's been able to pick up or identify deficits that standard neuropsychological neuropsych cognitive tests are missing. So there's room for exploration for that within the cancer space as well. Because again, it's sort of in the doing sometimes where the rubber
Yeah.
hits the road, I think.
Yeah, Dr. Sue said, let's write grants for training resources and to get more neurocognitive,
Let's do
capacity
it.
out there to test. So you should definitely connect with Dr. Sue, HSU, if you see his name. Um, Claire said she totally agrees. Did the MBSR-YA survivor study at Northwestern Medical? Can you talk more about that, Claire?
Yeah, so that was it was mindfulness-based stress reduction program at
Mhm.
for young adult cancer survivors. And it was 10 years ago and it helped me so much. It also helped that I had been a LEND trainee before that.
Oh,
So I
uh-huh.
already had the piece of disability pride kind of built in, and that my mom really had radicalized me very early to the recognition that um, that disability came in all kinds of ways. And
Hmm.
so I already had this concept, but yeah, getting some mindfulness in a group of young adult survivors was really incredible, and kind of connecting with people with similar experiences. I mean,
Hmm.
I came to sort of see breast cancer survivorship as really a strange kind of privilege because I did feel there was all this funding thrown at me. I got this fancy pink binder. I got so much support, free acupuncture, free massages. It was wild.
Hmm.
And certainly having had friends with other kinds of cancers and tumors that are not cancers but still require a huge amount of treatment, and um, it's challenging to kind of parse how to make the system work for more people. And I do think that med education is crucial in that, like, we have med students at the Lifespan Disability Clinic and they love the 2 weeks that they spend with us.
Yeah.
They're blown away by the amount of time and attention that each patient is getting, the fact that we're really talking through the multifaceted aspects of a person's wellness. It's amazing.
Nice.
So I think a similar thing for survivorship would be amazing.
I
Mhm.
want to rotate in your clinic, Claire.
Awesome.
I'm just we have
I
some.
do too. I know we're working hard to get OT in
I
there, actually.
know,
Yeah.
so underutilized these resources. So we will find a time. I'm always impressed, just, every time that there's a talk, there's always such a big, robust discussion. We see how many ways we can make things better. We talk about different ways we can problem solve, different challenges to come over. And
Hmm.
um, yeah, thank you again, Susan, and thank you all for staying on a little later. So, I got the recording this time, Susan.
Great.
So I'll try to get it uploaded quickly so I can share your the the flyers with everyone for the recruitment as well as this talk. So, thanks so much.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me and enjoy the rest of your summer day.
Yeah, you all too. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.